Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch, the show that brings you an up-to-date report on President Trump's activities during the previous week and gives you some analysis on what's been going on. Well, in the world of politics, as you all know, there are oftentimes humorous moments, and one of those is occurring right now. And it relates, of course, to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. But what I find humorous about this is because ever since Trump reassumed the presidency, he's been engaged in all sorts of actions that are destructive of the rights and liberties of the American people. I mean, a premier example, the war on immigrants that he's been waging with the massive immigration police state, ICE, Border Patrol, and so forth, raids and arrests with masked men on the side of the road, ununiformed policemen with masks kidnapping people and taking them away and disappearing them. And these are very destructive of a free society: freedom of association, liberty of contract, the confidence that you can walk down the street without being picked up by ununiformed masked men. But that doesn't seem to bother any of the MAGA people. We got to protect this nation against the illegal alien invaders, Jacob, whatever it takes. If it destroys our entire freedom, so be it. At least we'll be kept safe. And then you've got the tariffs, which are really just sales taxes on the American people, where Trump is raising the taxes to whatever extent he wants. 100%, whatever, without the specific consent of Congress. He's doing it by executive decree. And the MAGA people, oh, well, Jacob, yeah, but this is getting rid of the trade deficit and, all this other nonsense. But they go along with it, even though it's raising taxes on us. And then you've got the Ukraine matter, where, this is so bizarre, where Trump has done a complete flip-flop. Remember when he was campaigning that, this thing's going on long enough and I'm going to end it in 24 hours and we got to get out of there? And then there was that meeting at the White House where he and Vance just humiliated the heck out of Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. And now all of a sudden, 180-degree change. We're going to furnish weaponry to Ukraine. We're going to put sanctions on Putin. And it's just bizarre. But the MAGA supporters say, Jacob, whatever's necessary for national security, Trump knows best. He has access to information that we don't have, and we got to keep supporting the president here. It's just sort of like blind support, even though it's the exact opposite of what the guy campaigned on. But all that, is like, okay, well, yeah, it might result in nuclear war, Jacob, but, we got to support the president. But all of a sudden, Jeffrey Epstein, oh my gosh, the MAGA people are in full rebellion. Which I just find so humorous because, all these other things that destroy our rights and liberties, and all of a sudden they're upset because Jeffrey Epstein's investigative files have not been released, which they should be released. I'm with them on that, but it's just kind of funny that they're so upset about that and not about the destruction of our rights and liberties. Now, let me talk about this Epstein matter because it's obviously an important matter. But let me just say right off the top that there is no possibility that these investigative files are going to be released. It's just not going to happen. And so that means, what are the MAGA people going to do about it? They're obviously in full rebellion right now. But are they going to give up? Possibly. Once they realize is that no matter how much they protest, nothing's going to happen. Trump will throw them a bone here and there, like they just released the investigative records on Martin Luther King, and I'm sure that's not a coincidence that they got those rushed out. That'll pacify the MAGA people for a while. It might. And then Trump says, we'll give them the grand jury evidence that was shown before the grand jury on Epstein's indictment. Well, that's a bone too, because everybody knows that, for one thing, a judge has to approve that. It's always been our tradition in this country that grand jury proceedings always remain secret. But also, there's not a whole lot of evidence that comes before a grand jury. They had this guy dead to rights, Epstein. And so all they had to do before the grand jury is produce one witness, one of the underage girls, of the many underage girls. It wasn't just one that he had been sexually involved with. And all they would need to do is produce one, and that would secure an indictment. I mean, grand juries are usually just rubber stamps for whatever the prosecutor wants. And so to get an indictment, all they would have had to do is provide some evidence, essentially equal to probable cause type of evidence, to secure an indictment. So you're talking about a minimal amount of evidence compared to the massive amount of evidence they would have that would go into investigating this guy. And that's what they should be releasing, is just all the investigative files. If they want to go to the judge and try to get the grand jury released, also fine. But release all of the investigative files that went into investigating him. See, that's what they don't want to release. And so my hunch is, as I've written in my blog today, on Tuesday, July 22nd, is that whenever this happens, that the likely possibility is they're going to look for distractions. And one of the best time-honored distractions is to produce a foreign war or a foreign crisis. And James Madison pointed this out, and where he said that in the Roman Empire, it was just standard fare for the emperor whenever there was a rebellion forming against like out-of-control spending, debasement of the currency, massive taxation, that the emperor would just gin up a war against some big, scary official enemy, and that would cause everybody to drop the rebellion. They'd be fearful of the official enemy, and so they'd rally around the flag, patriotism, and so forth. And then by the time the war was over, everybody would either be dead or so exhausted that they would have forgotten the original rebellion. And so don't be surprised if that happens today. That perfect opportunity would be Ukraine. Just furnish Ukraine with long-range missiles and look the other way when Ukraine starts firing them at Moscow or St. Petersburg. And all of a sudden, Russia's faced with a very big problem. Do they just continue to let these big cities be bombed by U.S. weaponry? Or do they go and attack the places where the weaponry is being stockpiled in some NATO country before it's shipped into Ukraine? Because it becomes even clearer that the U.S. is using Ukraine as a proxy to wage war and destroy Russia. And so once that Russia decides to bomb those facilities that are stockpiling these long-range missiles that are hitting Moscow or St. Petersburg or other big Russian cities, killing large numbers of Russian civilians, then now we're looking at the prospect of all-out nuclear war. And that's enough to get people, of course, to forget Jeffrey Epstein. But there's other possibilities. China, given the deep hatred that the national security state has succeeded in inculcating in the minds of the American people against China, just in the past few years, it wouldn't be difficult to gin up a crisis there over Taiwan. The nice thing about the national security state, I put nice in quotation marks, is that they are ingenious about producing crises, of creating crises. There's always North Korea. We saw that in Trump's first administration, how easy it was to create this big crisis with North Korea, where everybody was focused on it. Notice, the crisis went away as soon as Trump lost interest in it. But that could easily be ginned up. Or Iran is always a good standby, that Iran's still producing their nuclear weapons and they're going to be mushroom clouds over American cities. Remember that with the attack on Iraq many years ago, that Iraq's got weapons of mass destruction, mushroom clouds over American cities, and everybody got scared and said, we got to support the invasion of Iraq because the President Bush has access to information we don't have. We have to trust our rulers and so forth. And and you saw this at the end of the Cold War, too, that when people were demanding a peace dividend, remember that? A peace dividend meant massive reductions in spending for the national security state, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA, which would have meant a massive reduction in taxes. Well, lo and behold, we get the 9/11 attacks, and everybody forgets the peace dividend. Okay, and the 9/11 attacks came about after the U.S. national security state went into the Middle East, began killing countless Iraqis, including children, with their brutal system of sanctions, posting troops on Islamic holy lands, unconditional support for the Israeli government. And all that manifests itself with anger and hatred that produces the 9/11 attacks, and peace dividends over. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see a massive distraction here if the MAGA people continue rebelling. Now, let me put the whole Epstein thing in context, because I think it's important to understand, what exactly is going on here. If you go back to the beginning of this thing in terms of the legal process, it was the federal government that was indicting Epstein for pedophilia. I mean, this guy had engaged in sexual relations, forcible sexual relations against countless, I shouldn't say countless, but many, I don't know the exact number, but even maybe dozens, at least several underage girls. And so they had this guy dead to rights. This was around 2007, 2008. They had him dead to rights. I mean, it would have been easy to get a conviction of him in federal court for the trafficking of young girls, underage girls, for the purpose of sexual relations, which, if there's intercourse, is obviously rape as a matter of law. And so they had him dead to rights. This guy, they could have put away for the rest of his life, and should have, really, when you consider what he did. But interestingly enough, there was a plea bargain. I think it's got to be the most bizarre plea bargain I have ever seen. As you all know, I practiced law for 12 years as a civil and criminal trial attorney, and this has got to be the most bizarre plea deal I have ever seen. That the feds, the federal prosecuting attorneys, entered into an agreement with state prosecutors to let the state prosecutors accept a guilty plea for improper sexual relations with an underage girl from Epstein. Now, this is really bizarre because almost always it's the other way around. It's the state that's deferring to the feds. The feds want the notch on their belt that, hey, we got the conviction. Here, they're saying, well, we'll give up the notch, which is really weird, in order to let you guys have the notch at the state level. Well, then the state plea bargain was that Epstein would plead guilty, but receive I think it was a 13-month sentence. I mean, as compared to spending the rest of his life in prison, or at least 20, 30 years, 13 months. Oh, but it gets even worse. That you've got Epstein not going to the state penitentiary to serve the 13 months. Under the terms of the deal, he got to serve his 13 months in the county jail, where conditions are obviously much more comfortable than they are in a state penitentiary. Oh, but it gets even worse. What they were doing with this guy is letting him out of jail, out of the county jail every morning, so that he'd go tend to his business and then return to the county jail at night, where he would spend the night. So essentially his sentence amounted to 13 months of spending the night in the county jail for 13 months. I mean, that is one sweetheart deal. There's no question about it. And I think there's only one possible explanation for this, because like I say, it would be standard. Anybody else, you take just a regular person that gets indicted by the feds for trafficking with underage girls, I will guarantee you they're going to go after him with a vengeance. And rightly so. And they're going to get at least a 20, 30-year jail sentence, possibly life. So how did this happen? Well, I think there's only one logical explanation. Now, I know the mainstream press, conspiracy theory, Jacob, conspiracy theory. But give me another rational explanation for it. Okay? I don't ever I see the mainstream press saying conspiracy theory, but I never see them giving a rational explanation for this plea bargain. Give me just any rational explanation for it. It seems to me there's only one rational explanation, and that is that there are people involved here that are so powerful, so wealthy, that they're able to pressure and squeeze a federal prosecutor and a state prosecutor into doing this. And keep in mind also another aspect of this. Everything was kept secret. While they were working out the terms of this plea bargain, they didn't let the girls know about this, or who might have been women by this time. They might have already reached the age of 18. But they're the victims. They have an interest in what's going on here. they kept it all secret from trying to get the deal through before they could have time to object to it before the judge and ask the judge not to accept the plea bargain. So there's only one rational explanation. There are very powerful forces here that brought about this plea bargain. Again, I don't see how there is any other rational explanation. Now, what are these powerful forces? Well, I think it's logical to infer that the clients that Epstein had that were participating in this pedophilia ring are very, very powerful, wealthy, influential people. Remember, he was hobnobbing with some pretty bigwigs in terms of the investment world, the political world. And if any of those people engaged in pedophilia along with him or as part of his little pedophilia ring here, those people are so powerful and so wealthy, so influential, that they would be the type of people that can bring pressure to bear. And when people are able to bring pressure to bear in the federal system, that is power. I mean, that is influence. Because normally, federal prosecutors are fairly fiercely independent of that type of thing. So when you see it happening, it's like, whoa, that is big power. All right, now I think it's fairly well documented that Epstein had this thing going on. I mean, there's speculation that what he was doing was bringing in people to participate in these improper schemes and wealthy people, and then videotaping them secretly. And then after they returned home, he would contact them and say, hey, got this videotape. Hope you had a great weekend. But of course, we're going to be protecting that videotape. But can you invest some money in my fund? Because he had an investment fund where he was making a lot of money. And the more money that comes into his investment fund, the better it is. So it's a nice little form of blackmail, but it's not like blackmail in the sense that somebody's paying him money, because clearly there would be evidence of that could ultimately incriminate him. But when somebody's just investing money in his fund, there's no evidence that, oh, this is blackmail, you see. And so if somebody really did participate in this scheme and then later realized that Epstein had videotaped him, it would be in his interest to invest in the fund. And I presume the fund was very successful. It wasn't like, people were losing money in this fund, I don't think. It was just an alternative means, an alternative fund where they could put their money in. So it's like a beautiful scheme here. But there's another possible factor here. That one U.S. official was quoted as saying that Epstein had ties to intelligence, not to U.S. intelligence, but just to intelligence, and that he needed to be left alone, untouched. Now that to me makes the most sense, because if Epstein has ties to the Mossad in Israel or to the CIA, that is sufficiently powerful. Those forces are sufficiently powerful to put the quietus on any federal or state investigation. And if it's the Mossad, well, then clearly it's going to be the CIA involved too, because the Mossad and the CIA are joined at the hips. I mean, they are together. And so if the Mossad is saying we need to put a stop to this investigation, the CIA is going to be right in there too. And we all know the power that the CIA has with respect to the federal government bureaucracy. Now, this gets us back to something I've been emphasizing for many years now. And, I would imagine there's some people saying, Jacob, no, it's just not possible. It just can't be. And that is the point that the national security state, the national security establishment, national security branch of the federal government is running the federal government. Now, this is not just my thesis. This is also the thesis. In fact, I think it's the main person that develops this thesis that had such a tremendous influence on me is Michael Glennon. Brilliant man, attorney, a law professor at Tufts University. He served as counsel for the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I mean, you can look up Glennon's biography. This is a very, very prominent, prestigious man who's written this book called National Security and Double Government. Again, I know I've recommended it in the past, but I'm going to recommend it again. If you haven't read it, you need to read it. Every American should read Glennon's book. And the thesis is very simple, that once the U.S. was converted to a national security state, form of governmental structure, the national security branch of the government became the most powerful branch. It's got the tanks, the infantry, the airplanes, everything. Government is force, but this is where most of the force is concentrated. Okay, you've got force with the IRS and the force with ICE or Border Patrol, but it doesn't compare to the force of the national security branch of the government. That's where it's concentrated. And so before long, and with omnipotent powers, remember, before the conversion to a national security state, the federal government, for example, didn't have the power of assassination. Now it does. Once it got converted to a national security state, it acquired the power of assassination. And then when you combine that with a foreign interventionism, foreign policy, you've got a very powerful group here, the national security branch of the government. And what Glennon documents in such detail and so effectively is that it is the national security branch of the government that is running the show in the federal government, but the other three branches are given the veneer of power. You see, the national security branch doesn't care about the real power, the appearance of power. If they want to let President Trump feel like he's running the show, great. Or the Congress, great. They don't care about that. What matters is if they're running the show. Now, once you adopt that conclusion, you start looking at things completely differently. For example, when Trump is doing the 180 on Ukraine, people say, well, why is he changing positions like this? What's going on? Oh, we have to trust him. He has information. I don't look at it like that at all. I look at it as, okay, what did the national security branch of the government do to cause Trump to change his mind? In other words, the national security branch of the government provoked this war with Ukraine and Russia in the first place. We can see that with how they use NATO in violation of the agreement. The promises that the U.S. president had made at the time, at the end of the Cold War, not to expand NATO eastward. The national security establishment says, to heck with that promise. That's the president, okay? That's the guy that is not in charge. They're in charge. The Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA. They use NATO to provoke this war between Russia and Ukraine, and they're not about to give up that war. This is like a cash cow for them. Keeps everybody all stirred up. And so, but Trump says, well, okay, let me, and this is just my opinion, but I think it's a reasoned opinion. Trump says, well, let me appear like I'm in charge, and they don't care. So Trump says, well, okay, I've changed my mind. I'm going to now, no matter how much I humiliated Zelensky, even if I said that Ukraine started this war, I'm going to furnish these long-range weapons, and I'm going to order sanctions on Putin. So he appears as he's in charge, and the national security branch says, okay. So I look at this, every time I see something big going on, I immediately focus not on Trump, like all the MAGA people do. Trump needs to release the Epstein files. I'm looking at the national security establishment saying they don't want these Epstein files to be released. And if Epstein did have a connection to U.S. intelligence, it would stand to reason. It's logical that they would not want that released. And so that, in my opinion, is what's going on here. It is the national security branch of the government that is saying these records are not going to be released, period. Whether it's because they had a direct connection to Epstein or whether it was the Mossad that had the connection or both of them had the connection. But I think if you look at them as a powerful force in American society, within America's governmental structure, as the most powerful force, as the force that's managing the federal government, running the federal government, then it all makes sense. Because they have the power to be able to squelch any federal investigation, either directly through a U.S. attorney or a state prosecutor, or indirectly by having the president put a stop to it, or some favorite member of Congress or members of Congress that put the pressure on. But it seems to me that as powerful as the clients of Epstein may have been, as wealthy as they may have been, that sure, they may have had the influence and power to squelch a federal investigation and get this sweetheart deal for Epstein. But I think the much more logical conclusion is that it is the national security branch that wields the real power to get that done. I find it fascinating in how this thing's going to work out and play out, because if the MAGA people don't give up, what happens at this point? Now, Trump's clearly trying to throw them bones. They just released the records relating to Martin Luther King. He's saying, oh, well, you can go ahead and release the grand jury records, which means going to a judge and getting permission. But remember, a grand jury, it's a very relatively small amount of evidence. A grand jury is essentially a rubber stamp for federal prosecutors, state prosecutors too, so that they don't have to take in a lot of evidence into the grand jury. They could take one girl, underage girl, or who was underage during the offense, and say, okay, this is what he did to me, Epstein, or one of Epstein's clients. And so they get Epstein indicted just on that one evidence. It's not a problem to get an indictment. But they're not going to take all of their whole investigation and all the girls that were involved here and put them before a grand jury. They don't need to do that. And if they don't get an indictment at one grand jury, they just go to the next. What really is key here is all of the investigative files. And there's no real reason why they shouldn't be released to the public. I mean, they're saying, oh, well, it might adversely affect a new prosecution of this woman that was involved with Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, or I think that's her name. Her case is on appeal, but the likelihood of her winning her appeal is pretty small. But even if she has to be retried, so what? I think the public has more of an interest in seeing what these records reflect, because I think they're going to reflect the real corruption. It's not just Epstein, it's the real corruption within the entire system that is involved here, including the national security state system. And as I have long maintained, that was quite possibly the worst mistake America has ever made, was to convert from a limited government republic to a national security state. That is really the core of the problem. Much bigger problem than the welfare state, the drug war, the war on immigrants, the regulated managed economy, the paper money system, the Federal Reserve. At the core of the rot of this entire system, statist system, or systems, is the national security state. And we're seeing that corruption now, in my opinion, here in the Epstein scandal. How is this thing going to pan out? I don't know. It's going to be pretty interesting to see whether the MAGA people give up and forget their rebellion and be happy with any bones that are tossed to them, or whether they keep demanding, which they should. Every American should be demanding the disclosure of all these records, for no other reason just to see the rot at the center of this entire system under which we live. I think it would help to, as a cleansing process, in terms of where we are as a country today. That's my report for this week. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for your great support of FFF. And if we continue striving, I have absolutely no doubts we can get this country back on the right track. Thank you again.